Congratulations, class of 2019. I'm very honored to be able to address you at this one last time, but I should tell you that after I was invited to speak, a colleague helpfully pointed out to me that this particular honor comes bundled with the expectation that I prepare this talk. So really, she said, it's not so much an award as it is my former students assigning me homework. And so to you, class of 2019, I say, touché. Well played. With this, my last opportunity to try to teach you something, anything. I've chosen to use this time to warn you about the dangers of self-confidence. Now, the dangers of self-confidence may seem like a strange topic for a graduation speech. After all, this is typically a time when we boost your confidence. Now, when we point you toward the horizon and reassure you that you can conquer the world and create a better tomorrow for all of us. And arguably one of the purposes of your MBA education was to build your confidence, providing you with new knowledge and skills. Also, many of you are heading into professions where confidence is rewarded. No one wants to hire a consultant who says, "You were right. That was an extremely difficult problem. And after long hours of research, I have come to the conclusion that I just don't know." There may not be an answer. Now, where can we send the bill? When I say that self-confidence can be a problem, I'm not referring to all self-confidence. I'm referring to a specific kind of self-confidence. Confidence in our own understanding of how things work, how things really work in sciences and medicine, and economics and business, in politics and public policy. The simple fact is we, all of us, frequently overestimate how well we understand things, especially things that are outside of our immediate domains of expertise. Psychologists have a name for it. They call it the illusion of knowledge. And I'm not just talking about super complex and confusing things like quantum physics and quantitative easing or the continuing appeal of Post Malone. Seriously, guys, I don't get it. No, the illusion of knowledge also biases our judgments of even the commonplace and familiar. One of the early demonstrations of the illusion of knowledge came from cognitive psychologists Leonid Rosenblit and Frank Kiel. They took a group of people. Actually, it wasn't just regular people. They took graduate students from various departments at Yale University, and they asked these really smart, well-informed people just how well they understood a bunch of commonplace items, things like zippers and flush toilets, piano keys, and door locks. Participants in the study rated their understanding as high, as I imagine many of us would if we were asked the same. Of course I understand zippers. In fact, I'm kind of a zipper expert, using them several times a day. Why, not to brag, but I flawlessly executed the zipping up of these very clothes that I'm wearing right now. True story. The next phase of the study, after participants rated their understanding, they were asked to use this self-proclaimed knowledge to write detailed essays of how these items actually worked. Not so easy, is it? Could you write an essay about how a zipper actually works? After writing the essays, participants then went back and rated their initial knowledge again. Next, participants were asked a series of diagnostic questions about the items and how they functioned. They then rated their initial understanding again. Finally, participants read explanatory essays written by experts in each of these fields and then rated their own initial understanding one last time. At each stage, as people were forced to learn more and examine their own knowledge, their ratings of their own understanding got lower and lower. Actual knowledge was revealed, dispelling the illusion of knowledge. These findings are not limited to gadgets and appliances. Psychologists Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach replicated these results with political issues. As they reported in their book, The Knowledge Illusion, asking people how well they understood things like single-payer healthcare systems or cap-and-trade carbon emission programs resulted in very high levels of confidence. People think they understand these policies. But when these researchers then asked people to generate explanations of these policies, they found two things. First, people generally didn't have much to say. Despite being confident in their understanding, when given the opportunity to explain, most people couldn't. And second, after writing what they knew about these policies, most people subsequently rated themselves as less knowledgeable than they had initially thought. It is often the case that the more we learn about something, the more we think about it, the more we start to see its complexities, the more we discover there is still a lot to learn. This insight was espoused by geniuses throughout history. The genius Greek philosopher Socrates said, "The more I learn, the less I realize I understand." Socrates' genius student Plato said something very similar in the Republic. He said, "I am the wisest man alive, for I know one thing, and that is that I know nothing." Genius playwright William Shakespeare had one of his characters put it this way, "The fool doth think he is wise, but the wise man knows himself to be a fool." Even uber genius Albert Einstein, the smartest of them all, expressed the same idea when he said, "The more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know." Albert Einstein said that. Or maybe he didn't. If I'm being totally honest, I'm not sure he did. The internet also attributes exactly that same quote to Stephen Hawking, and to Michel Legrand, and to Tony Bennett, and also to some guy on Instagram named @Lukorowski. But even if Einstein didn't say it, Tony Bennett probably did, and that ain't nothing. So, according to Socrates and William Shakespeare, and @Lukorowski on Instagram, if you are feeling confident in your mastery of some topic, that is not necessarily a good thing. If something seems simple or straightforward, that is the time to take a step back. That may be a sign that now is the time to do more studying and less talking. Likewise, if you hear someone else speak with great confidence about some topic, that is not necessarily a sign that they are actually an expert and should be listened to. Some psychologists documented the nonlinear relationship between confidence and competence several years ago. In one of the most depressing and least surprising findings in psychology, Justin Kruger and David Dunning asked people to assess their own competence in various domains, including humor, grammar, and logic. After allowing people to rate their own skills in these domains, the researchers then objectively evaluated these participants' knowledge. They found that those who were experts and those who had no competence at all were fairly accurate in assessing their own knowledge. But there was this bizarre spike in confidence for people who knew just slightly more than nothing. People with just a little bit of knowledge were often the most confident in their own understanding, often professing even greater confidence than true experts. These researchers called this overconfidence in one's opinions based on objectively low levels of expertise the Dunning-Kruger effect. Some of you who have listened to the unwanted advice of people who have been successfully doing something else entirely may recognize it as the senior management effect. I call it the faculty meeting effect. That's the funniest joke I will tell all day. You just don't know. As Charles Darwin once prophetically said, ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge. So we should, all of us, be cautious in assessing our own understanding of the world and how it works. We should likewise be cautious about heeding the advice of those who speak with the greatest confidence, but have no credentials or demonstrable expertise. But what can we do about this illusion of knowledge? How can we dispel it? Let me propose one rather simple solution. Act like a child. There's a school of developmental psychology that has proposed that the way children learn is by acting like little scientists, developing theories, making hypotheses, testing those hypotheses, and refining their theories. This idea that humans develop by constructing causal explanations and testing them is called theory. No, seriously. According to theory, children learn by developing theories through hypotheses and experimentation. Young children, lacking the ego defenses that often afflict adults, can unselfconsciously embrace their own ignorance, thereby avoiding the trap of the illusion of knowledge. We, too, can dispel the illusion of knowledge by approaching problems the way young children do, by generating hypotheses to be tested, rather than jumping directly to full-fledged solutions to be enacted. You can develop hypotheses related to your job. You can develop hypotheses related to your company, related to your home life, to your personal relationships. The hypothesis is a universal tool for improving your life. Let me briefly explain why hypotheses are superior to solutions. First, the hypothesis is designed to be tested. It's built right into the nature of a hypothesis. When you make a prediction about something, you typically claim a stake in the outcome, and that can bias your evaluations and judgments. We naturally want to be right. We want our predictions to be accurate, and that can lead to evaluating our own predictions in an overly positive light. Hypotheses acknowledge the inherent complexity of the world. Hypotheses acknowledge that we don't often know. We can make our best guesses based on how we think the world works, but even the best knowledge and the most robust experience must be tested again and again. Hypotheses take the sting out of being wrong because they allow us to iterate and improve. Hypotheses give us the freedom to learn. The second advantage of hypotheses is that a good hypothesis is falsifiable. Hypotheses are designed to be proven wrong. This focus on seeking evidence that disproves our current assumptions and beliefs means that hypotheses focus us on constant improvement, rather than on defending our own cognitive status quo. We naturally default to confirmation bias, assuming that what we already believe is right and blinding ourselves to evidence to the contrary. Hypotheses, good hypotheses, force us out of that bind by encouraging us to seek out weaknesses in our current understanding. Finally, hypotheses focus us on process instead of just on outcomes. Generating a good hypothesis requires that we first generate a good theory. It is possible to be successful in life without a good understanding of what caused us to be successful. But relying on luck and intuition is not a good long-term strategy. Jeanne Ross, a research scientist at MIT, articulated this point well in a recent article in the Sloan Management Review titled, "Why Hypotheses Beat Goals." She argued that goals can focus us too much on short-term outcomes, to the detriment of our understanding of what drives successes and failures. As she put it, hypotheses force individuals to articulate in advance why they believe a given course of action will succeed. A failure then exposes an incorrect hypothesis, which you can more reliably convert into organizational learning. Hypotheses, properly tested, lead to deeper understanding than do goals. So that's it. My last-ditch attempt to teach you something useful before you head out the doors. I did the best I could. It was my honor and pleasure to be your teacher. I wish you all the best, all the success, and all the happiness. Congratulations, class of 2019. Go and do great things, acting with purpose and humility, and always in the spirit of learning more. Thank you.